After the conversation, I will decide what happens next. Every man in that room understood precisely what that meant. I divided the teams. Sung Min would take 8 men to the north entrance near the rail platform. Tai Liang would lead 6 to the south loading dock entry. I would go through the main front entrance with 4 men directly beside me. Each team had someone with medical training in case any of the victims needed immediate attention. We had run operations like this before. Not for reasons like this, but the mechanics were identical. Move fast, move quiet, seal the exits before anyone inside understands what is happening. Then my phone vibrated on the table. An unknown number. I picked it up. On the screen was a photograph. Mi Ray Kim. Suara's mother. Tied to a metal chair inside what appeared to be a bare concrete room. Alive. Terrified. Staring into a camera that someone was forcing her to face. I looked at the photograph for exactly 3 seconds. Then I set the phone face down on the table. The Becks just confirmed the location themselves, I said. They sent this thinking it would make me pay to keep her alive and safe. I kept my voice absolutely flat. They were wrong about that. I picked up my jacket from the chair behind me. Change of plans. We leave in 10 minutes, not 30. Nobody in that room argued. I stepped outside into the cool October air and stood alone on the pavement for a moment. The street was quiet and still. Mrs. O's pharmacy was 4 blocks north of where I stood. I could not see it from here, but I knew Suar was in there right now, sitting on some chair or stool behind the counter, watching the entrance door with the same focused, patient concentration she had shown outside my restaurant. The same quiet patience she had been using for 3 days alone in an apartment with crackers and peanut butter and nothing but the flat refusal to give up on her mother. I thought about what she had asked me. Will you get hurt? I had been doing this kind of work for over 20 years. I had been through more confrontations than I could easily count. Through all of it, not one single person had ever asked me that specific question. Not one. 3 vehicles left through the back of Hannah at 9:40. Black, unmarked. License plates that would trace nowhere if anyone checked. We moved through the city the way I had always moved, side streets, camera blind spots, routes I had spent 14 years memorizing in order to stay 1 step ahead. The young Jumpo district at night looked like the rest of Seoul from the outside, lit up, moving, alive with the ordinary noise of a city going about its business. But behind the rail yard, where the old warehouses sat in a row between the loading platforms and the river embankment, the city seemed to forget itself. Broken streetlights. Empty lots. The kind of area where sounds in the night went ignored because everyone nearby had long ago decided it was far safer not to hear anything at all. We parked 2 streets from the target building. Through my binoculars I counted for guards visible from the street. 2 at the main door, 1 at the northeast corner of the yard, 1 on the roof scanning in the wrong direction entirely. Their movements were casual. Bored. They had no expectation of anyone arriving. Sung Min's voice came through my earpiece. North position confirmed. 2 guards at the platform gate. Both stationary. Then Tai Yang. South dock covered. 1 guard. Already handled quietly. Move on my signal in 60 seconds, I said. I checked my weapon 1 final time and thought about Suara's coins. We moved fast and we moved quiet. Years of working together had taught my men something impossible to write in any manual, the ability to communicate without sound. A hand signal, a shift of the shoulder, a glance that carries a complete sentence worth of meaning. We crossed the outer yard like shadows that had learned to walk upright and purposeful. The 2 front guards were down before they understood there was anything to react to. The rooftop guard was neutralized before he completed his turn. By the time I stepped through the main entrance of the warehouse, 8 of the Beck brothers' men had already been removed from the situation entirely and quietly. The ground floor smelled like industrial oil and something worse underneath it. Tai Yang, give me status, I said, keeping my voice very low. Ground floor entirely clear. South side fully secured. 3 contacts neutralized. Sung minute. North wing clear. No casualties on our side. Moving to the main stairwell right now. 3 floors. The women were on 3. The brothers were on 2. I headed for 3 first without hesitation. Mi Kim was the only priority that mattered right now. Everything else would follow after she was safe. I took the stairs quickly with Taeyang directly behind me and 2 others at our backs, moving in practiced silence. Mi Kim was sitting on the bare floor in the corner of the room. Her hands were bound behind her with cable ties. Her face was pale and her eyes were barely open. They had given her something to keep her calm and unable to resist. She was conscious, but only just. She looked up when I came through the door and flinched hard against the wall. "I am not one of them," I said immediately. I crouched down, keeping both hands visible where she could see them. "My name is Jinho. Your daughter sent me. Suar. She is completely safe." The woman's face collapsed. Not in fear. In the precise, overwhelming way that faces collapse when a person who has been holding on with absolutely everything they have is finally allowed to let go of it. She could not speak. Her whole body shook. I took out a small blade and cut the cable ties with one clean motion. Her wrists were badly bruised underneath. She pulled her arms forward and held them against her chest like they were deeply painful, because they were. "There are other women here," Taeyang said quietly from the doorway behind me. "Get every one of them out. Medical team standing by at the vehicles." I looked at Mi carefully. "Can you stand on your own?" She nodded firmly, jaw set, silent tears running down her face. She stood. Sung Min's voice came through my earpiece while I was guiding Mi down the corridor toward the stairwell. 3 more women confirmed on the north end of the 3rd floor. 1 needs immediate medical attention. All 4 are alive. 4 women total. Plus Mi. 5 people the Beck brothers had been holding in that building. I passed Mi carefully to one of my men and told him to stay with her all the way to the vehicles and remain there. Then I turned and walked back to the stairwell and headed down to the 2nd floor. On the way down I thought about Suar telling me about her father. A construction site somewhere in this city, 14 months ago. A man who had needed money and had nowhere legitimate to go, so he had gone to people like the Beck brothers instead. He had died before he could pay it back. He had left behind a wife working 2 jobs and a daughter who learned to be careful with crackers. The Beck brothers had looked at that situation and seen an open debt on their ledger rather than a tragedy. They had waited patiently for a year while Mi Kim rebuilt a small, careful life. Then they had knocked on her door. I pushed open the 2nd floor door. Donghyun and Jaewon Beck were exactly where my intelligence had placed them. Donghyun Beck was counting cash at a wooden table when we came through the door. Jaewon was on a phone call that he ended the instant he turned and saw us standing there. Both men reached for weapons simultaneously. Neither one reached them. My team had the entire room secured in under 5 seconds. Donghyun raised both hands slowly. He was larger than I had expected. The snake tattoo coiled exactly as Suar had described it, running up the left side of his neck. He looked at me with the expression of a man who is recalculating very fast and finding none of the numbers working in his favor. "Park Jinho," he said, steadying his voice carefully. "This is a straightforward misunderstanding." "It is not," I said. "The woman owes a legitimate and documented debt. Her husband borrowed from us. We have all the paperwork to show it." "I know about the debt," I said. I stepped closer to the table. 8 million won. Borrowed by a man who died in a construction accident 14 months ago. A man who left behind a wife working 2 jobs every day and a 7-year-old daughter who has been completely alone in an apartment for 3 days, eating crackers slowly, because she was too frightened to tell anyone what happened. The room was entirely silent. Jaewon Beck, gold teeth on the left side of his mouth, exactly as described, looked sideways at his older brother. I took out my phone and showed them the photograph they had sent me. "You sent me this photograph," I said, "because you believed it would demonstrate your reach and make me afraid of what you could do. You believed that showing me a defenseless woman tied to a chair would establish your position in my territory." I looked at both of them slowly. "You made a serious and permanent mistake in your understanding of how this district operates." Dong-hyun tried one final time. "We can reach an arrangement tonight. The debt can be restructured, transferred, rewritten entirely on different terms. You take a cut of everything. Everyone benefits from this and..." "The debt is forgiven," I said. "Completely and permanently. Tonight. You will put that in writing before either of you leaves this room." He blinked. "And what do we give you in return?" "In return, I will explain to you clearly what happens to men who take mothers from their children inside my district. And then I will give you the opportunity to decide whether that explanation applies specifically to the two of you." The conversation that followed took 13 minutes. When it concluded, the Beck brothers' operation was finished in its entirety. Their men were gone. Their ledger, every name, every debt, every amount, was in my possession. Each person listed in that ledger would receive word that their obligation had been permanently and completely resolved. The Beck brothers would not operate in Seoul again. I kept my word about giving them the chance to leave. That was considerably more than they had offered Mi-rae Kim. I drove to Mrs. O's pharmacy myself, with Mi-rae in the back seat wrapped in a jacket one of my men had given her. She had not spoken since leaving the warehouse. She sat with her hands folded quietly in her lap and her eyes on the passing city through the window. I did not push her to talk. Some things require silence before they can ever become words. The pharmacy lights were still burning when we pulled up outside. It was 11:47 at night. I opened the back door and helped Mi-rae out. Then I walked to the pharmacy entrance and knocked twice in the way Mrs. O knew meant me. She opened the door immediately. She took one look at Mi-rae and put both arms around her without saying a single word. Over Mi-rae's shoulder I could see into the pharmacy behind her. Soo-ah was sitting on the tall stool behind the counter with her legs swinging back and forth, watching the entrance door with the concentrated focus of someone who has been watching a door for a very long time and refuses to stop until it opens. She saw her mother. She was off the stool and running before anyone in the room could react. The sound that came from Soo-ah Kim when she reached Mi-rae was not a word or a name. It was something far older than words. The sound of a child who had held everything together completely alone finally being allowed to fall apart into the one safe place that exists for her in the world. Mi-rae held her daughter for a long time. Long enough that Mrs. O quietly moved to the back to make tea, and I stayed in the doorway because some moments are not meant to have an audience. Eventually Soo-ah looked up at me over her mother's shoulder. "You came back," she said. "I gave you my word." She nodded slowly. Then she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out the 10,000 won I had returned to her before sending her here. She held it out toward me with both hands. "I still want to pay you," she said. "It is the right thing to do." I looked at the money. Then I looked at this 7-year-old girl who had made a plan, saved every single coin she could find, walked to the most dangerous address in the neighborhood, stood completely still until someone listened, worried about whether I would be hurt, and spent 3 hours waiting alone in a pharmacy without one word of complaint. I folded her fingers back over the notes gently. "You already paid me something worth far more than this," I said. She looked at me with complete seriousness. "With what?" I thought about it honestly before I answered. "You reminded me what the rules are actually for," I said. "Not the rules I made for business. The ones that existed long before any of that." She considered this for a moment. Then she leaned back into her mother, closed her eyes, and said nothing more. I walked out alone into the Seoul night. The city moved around me the same as always, lit up, loud, indifferent to everything that had just happened inside it. But for the first time in longer than I could clearly remember, I felt exactly like the person I was supposed to be. Not the man the neighborhood crossed streets to avoid. Not the name whispered with fear in back rooms and market stalls. Something older and simpler and more worth being. The 10,001 was still in my pocket. I never spent it. Sometimes the most powerful person in the room is not the one with the most men or the longest reputation. Sometimes it is a 7-year-old girl with a handful of saved coins, the willingness to walk through her own fear, and the absolute belief that someone out there still has a code worth trusting. Soo Kim was right. And because she was right, her mother came home. Sometimes that is exactly how the world is supposed to work.